I'm just going to start that over. Hey, this is Megan in the restricted section. Today I'm going to be doing my August wrap-up. So in the month of August I read 8 books, which I think is I think that's the biggest month I've had so far this year, but I had a lot of extra time in August, so I had a lot more time to read. And most of these books were actually pretty good, so let's just get into it. I'm going to try to make this not be 1,000 years long. So the first one that I read was Let Me In by John Ajvide Lundquist. I'm sure I butchered that. So this is a book I borrowed from Sue, and this is about a little girl who is a vampire, and she is pretty brutal. But yeah, so this book it's weird, but I really liked it. Yeah, it's really weird. So this little girl who's a vampire, she has this man who travels around with her, who is a pedophile, and he's in love with her, and so he kind of does her bidding and brings her blood, and then, you know, shit happens, and the little girl ends up making friends with this little boy named Oscar, who gets bullied, and things go from there. So I'm not gonna spoil it, but I guess there's 2 versions of a movie for this. I think there's like the original, what is it, like Swedish version, and then there's the American version. I borrowed the Swedish version of it from Sue, but I haven't watched it yet because I'm a little bit nervous about it. I don't watch horror or anything really, so I'm being a big sissy about it. But anyway, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. The next book I read was one of the books that I got at that big ass library sale that Sue and I went to. It's called Pharmakon by Dirk Wittenborn. Try not to get glare on there. So this book was much different than I thought it was going to be. So this is about a Yale professor of psychology in the early 50s, and he does some research. He does like one study with a drug that seems to make people a lot happier, and so he gets some college students to do the study with him. He ends up with one of the students from the study ends up kind of like stalking his family once the study's over, and I thought it was going to be more of a like thriller, and that the drug was going to play more of a role in the story, but it really only played a role in like I think the first part of it. And this book is, what it's really about is the Yale professor and his family, and the consequences of not only this drug study, I think, but of the man's career on his family, and just the man on his family. So I think it's just really more of a story about this dude and his family, which is fine, but not at all what I was expecting. It was okay. I didn't love it. I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't love it, and I didn't hate it. So it was fine. It was overall fine. But yeah, I feel like it's split up into, how many different parts? Like 3 or 4 parts? And I mean, it feels like very different novels. Like each part feels like its own novel. So, I mean, that was both cool and not cool. Because I was really more interested in, like I said, the drug and the study and that whole aspect of it. And I was expecting something different from this book. So, next book I read in August was, has become one of my new favorites. I actually gave it 5 out of 5 stars, which I don't do very often, but that I did twice in August. And that is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This is, I think, one of her most well-known novels. Kind of a story within a story. So it starts with a woman whose sister dies. That's not a spoiler, it says so on the back. Yeah, it opens with the words, 10 days after the war ended, my sister Laura drove a car off the bridge. So there's the story of this woman who lost her sister, and then there's a story of, there's a novel supposedly written by this woman's sister, of 2 star-crossed lovers, and when the lovers meet up, the man is telling like this sci-fi story to the woman. So there's kind of a story within a story. It was like really beautifully done, and I never felt like I lost the story. Like when it went back and forth, that didn't feel like jolting to me. It felt like it flowed really, really well. And the story was just kind of haunting and just really, it was melancholic, but it was beautiful, and I thought it was really well written. Yeah, I really loved this book. I kind of want to reread it. So I don't usually reread books, but yeah, this one, I really loved this one. It's one of my new favorites. The next book that I read was for the book club that I was in. I probably would not have read it otherwise, but it was called Year of Yes, How to Dance It Out, Stand in the Sun and Be Your Own Person by Shonda Rhimes. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I did not like the writing style in it. It was incredibly repetitive, and it was like reading a monologue on Grey's Anatomy. Like, obviously she wrote Grey's Anatomy, so you could see that in there. So the writing style wasn't really my favorite, but she did say a lot of things that I could get behind. I will say, though, that this book did cause me to, I had to check my white privilege while I was reading this book, because when I first started reading it, I was like, big deal, it's Shonda Rhimes. She writes, like, drama, like, TV shows that I don't watch. And so I wasn't really geeked about it. But then when I was reading it, she was talking about how, you know, she includes LGBT characters in her shows, she includes powerful women in her shows, she includes people of color in her shows, and they all play, like, a prominent role in that. And so she was talking about how she's trying to, like, she gets a lot of recognition for this, but what she's really trying to do is normalize television. And so that made me sit back and go, okay, hello white privilege, I never thought of that. Because when I turn on the television, I see people that look like me. I'm a woman, so there's, you know, there is some of that, you know, there's not as many strong female characters as I would like to see, but there are straight characters in abundance, there are white characters in abundance, and so I really had to check myself and realize, like, hey, what she's doing is important, and so that kind of did open my eyes to that a little bit and made me see that differently. So I'm glad that I read that, and I'm glad that I thought about that a different way and realized kind of a blind spot that I had. So I think that was a good, like, growing moment. Next book that I finished in August is Watership Down by Richard Adams. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. I won't talk too much about it because Sue and I filmed a review for that. It did take me forever to read. It was a slow book, but it was a very good book, and I'm glad that I read it. Our friend Sean recommended it to us and requested that we do a video about it, so I'm really glad that we read that. I think it was really good. Next book that I read in August was The Geek Feminist Revolution by Cameron Hurley. This is a collection of essays. Cameron Hurley is a blogger. She won a Hugo Award. Actually, she won a couple of Hugo Awards for some essays that she wrote. She writes, I think, sci-fi, fantasy type novels. But yeah, this was a really good collection of essays about women in geek culture, particularly women in like the sci-fi fantasy area of things. I really enjoyed it, and in this collection of essays, and then also in the collection of essays called Bad Feminist, there's an essay about, like, the unlikable female character, and that is always the one I think that I enjoy the most because it's the one I relate to the most. Because that's kind of, I feel kind of like the unlikable female character, just because I'm not very traditional when, you know, when somebody thinks of, like, maybe the traditional view of, you know, what women are, like, supposed to be or supposed to want, and I say that, you know, sorry about the air quotes, but there is really no way that we're supposed to be. But I cuss a lot, I drink a lot of beer, I don't want to have children, I'm not super domestic, so I'm very opinionated. Sometimes I speak without thinking, or black lipstick. I'm not warm and friendly, so I can relate to those unlikable female characters, and I can always relate to that essay on that topic. And how when women are, you know, quote unquote unlikable, it's less okay than when men are quote unquote unlikable, because men will be men and men are scoundrels and whatever other excuses there are for that. But yeah, so I really enjoyed this collection of essays. The thing that I really liked about this collection is that Cameron Hurley mentioned a lot of sci-fi fantasy authors who write maybe more broadly. They include more strong female characters in their writing. They include, you know, maybe people of color. They include LGBT characters. And so I would like to read more inclusive sci-fi. So I think that I'm going to check out some of the authors that she mentioned in this book. The last book that I read in the month of August is Kindred by Octavia Butler. And this is about a black woman living in California, I believe, in 1976. And she finds herself getting pulled back kind of at random into like the 1800s. And to help her white male ancestor, who seems to continually get himself into situations where he could die, and then her ancestors could potentially not be born. So she gets sucked back in time to save his ass, basically. So he lives on a plantation. He is the son of a plantation owner, and she is, like I said, she's a black woman. So it's really interesting. I thought it was really fascinating. I think Octavia Butler did a fantastic job with it. I thought it was really haunting. Yeah, when I got done with that book, I thought about it for like 2 days after I'd finished it. I'm really, really glad that I read it. And it was super, I think it was really unique, because, and this might be a spoiler, but at one of the times when the main character gets pulled back in time, her husband gets sucked back with her. Her husband's a white man. And they end up stuck in the 1800s for a while, and their experiences of it are obviously drastically different. And it kind of causes, you know, as you might imagine, it causes some friction between them at times. So I thought it was really fascinating. I loved it. I definitely want to read more Octavia Butler. I plan to read Dawn by Octavia Butler for my Read Harder challenge as the first book of a series by a person of color. And if it's even half as good as Kindred was, I'm sure I'll read that entire series, because I loved it. I loved Kindred. So I highly recommend it. Yeah, so those were the books I read in August. I had a great reading month, not just for quantity, but for quality. I read a lot of really good books in August, and that's really for me, that's the more important thing. But it did, you know, it did feel like an achievement to get 8 books read. So that's that was my reading month. So you guys comment below, let me know how you guys did. Let me know what you think of any of these books, if you've read them or if you want to read them. As always, there'll be some links down below where you can find Sue and I elsewhere on social media. If you're not already subscribed to our channel, you should probably do it. And that's it for me today. Bye!